So this is the Commlite EF2NZ adapter for using Canon EF lenses on your Nikon Z camera. I've got a couple things to say about it, and I didn't really see a very good review, so I figured I'd just do it. Right now I am filming on the adapter with the Canon EF 51.8 STM. It actually works quite well with this lens, so why not show it off a little? I would say overall for this adapter though, it's just okay. It really does depend on what lenses you're using. And the amount of lenses I would say that work great are not very large. So I should be putting up a graphic with the confirmed list of working lenses from Commlite. And then in addition, I did test some other lenses I had access to. I will note that these lenses I do not own, these are just ones I could play with. So take the information with a small grain of salt. At the very least you'll know, does it function at all? These are just my first impressions. Alright. So for stills is actually where I was the most disappointed. It doesn't seem to autofocus very reliably with most of the lenses that I tested. The silent stepping motor lenses, or STM ones, seem to work just fine. But when I got to lenses that were USM or any of the other ones, they seemed to pulse quite a bit. Either that or they would get confused and rack the focus back and forth quite a bit. This is just a quick clip from my 28mm f2.8 non-IS, the original version. And of course this lens is terribly loud when it autofocuses to begin with, but when it pulses it's quite unnerving actually. I don't want to just completely shit on this adapter though, because I actually do think it works quite well with certain lenses. My only concern is that it doesn't work with enough of them. When I switched to video autofocus, things got a little bit more interesting. I tested both my 50mm and the 28mm. Although some of the other lenses I played with, I didn't have enough time to really test video out thoroughly with them. But these two lenses actually tracked phenomenally. Well, maybe minus the 28mm and its terrible noise it makes when it autofocuses. It was pretty decent. Not as good as native f-mount lenses with the FTZ adapter, or especially the Z lenses, but reasonable enough that I think you could get away with it, especially if you're doing the face tracking priority. I wish I could say the same thing about using it in stills though. When I was using iDetect autofocus, it very regularly missed focus. Or I would get confirmation when it was focused in front of it a little bit. This caused me to miss a couple of photos just by a little bit, which is kind of infuriating when you're getting the focus confirmation and it looks okay in the viewfinder or the back screen, but you look at the picture later when you punch in and it's definitely not in focus. I didn't switch to face tracking, but at least in eye tracking it had some difficulty. This adapter does also work better when you're using the larger focus areas rather than the smaller ones. I typically shoot in just single point autofocus if I'm not doing an eye track. And I found that although the 50mm STM worked reasonably well, the other lenses tended to really struggle. And the smaller the focus box got, the worse it got. Using pinpoint autofocus was absolutely terrible, and I do not recommend using pinpoint for any of the Canon EF lenses. If you were to use the FTZ adapter with that, it's mostly fine, and especially the native Z lenses, it works perfectly fine. I was going through SteelsRing's website because they have their own version of this adapter, and they had mentioned that Canon EF lenses don't send over very precise autofocus measurements like the F-mount and Z-mount lenses do. Take this with a grain of salt. I can't confirm that, but at the very least in pinpoint focus it doesn't seem to work very good. The only downside to using the larger focus boxes though is that it's more difficult to focus on exactly what you want. So in this one test shot, which you should have seen multiple times already, I have 3 cameras layered in 3 sections. And with the larger focus boxes I had a hard time even selecting the other cameras because the focus box was so big that a part of the one in front of it was still grabbed in the box, so it stayed on it. I also noticed quite a lot with a lot of the lenses, I would put the focus box there and it would try to focus and then it wouldn't do anything. It would try for a second or stop or just do nothing, and I had to physically press either the AF on button in the back or the shutter button. Touching on the screen with autofocus on there didn't do anything. And of course, once you get to auto area, it seems mostly okay actually, just sometimes is a little bit off. I guess we'll find out how good it's working in video if I'm still in focus. If I'm not in focus by now, I'm going to be a little disappointed. I haven't exactly moved very far. If anything, I've rocked back and forth. One more thing I'm going to throw in. If you choose to use the onboard microphone on your Z-Series camera, it will pick up most of these lenses autofocusing. I'm not aware of any of the Canon EF lenses being completely silent with this adapter. They all seem to make a little bit of a clicking sound. So just be aware of that. Maybe use a on-person microphone instead, or just something that's away from the camera. Honestly, I was too lazy to set it up that way with any other microphone, so whoops. I did want to kind of answer a couple of questions I had about the adapter before I purchased it, because there's not a whole lot of information on this thing. One of the things that I thought was really nice is that this does not auto-crop EFS lenses. So if you have a lot of APS-C lenses, it's not going to auto-crop like the FTZ adapter does. Now, in reality, you would never want to shoot an APS-C lens on a full-frame sensor because you would get that very big vignette circle. But it's fun to see how a lot of those EFS lenses perform on a full-frame sensor. Do they cover a lot of full-frame is always the question I've wondered. Same thing with Nikon's DX lenses. Another thing that was good is that if you have your camera set to autofocus and then the lens switch the Canon lens to manual focus, the camera will detect that. So if you have focus peaking enabled in the settings, it will auto bring up focus peaking when you switch it on the lens. That's very nice to see, actually. As for the EXIF data and the metadata in general, it was pretty good at transmitting everything to the information. You got your focal length, you got your aperture, and of course shutter speed's controlled by the camera, so that's a non-issue. The only disappointment that I noticed is that it doesn't actually send the lens information. Every single lens that you shoot with on this adapter will be listed as the 24-70 f4 Z lens, which is the kit lens of the Z6 and Z7. As for the image stabilization, just as they claimed, it seems to work fine for everything. The only issue I noticed was with one Tamron lens. I tried out the 150-600mm, and with the what they call VC, or image stabilization, or VR, whatever you want to call it, when I had that enabled on the lens, it was actually fighting the IBIS of the camera. In this case, I just disabled the VC on the Tamron lens, and it autofocused just fine. So third-party lenses, beware. You might have to disable the, the vibration reduction, whatever they call it on there, or you might have to turn off IBIS in the camera. As for build quality is actually pretty decent on the lens. It's a nice metal construction. I noticed in the pictures in the back it was black, so I was wondering if it was plastic. No, it is actually a full metal construction. So in that regard, I have no complaints. It does have a removable tripod collar on the bottom. You can just unscrew it and then it'll pop off. This is really nice if you're using the camera on a tripod rather than using the lens on the tripod. If you're using a small lens, you shouldn't ever have to use it on the adapter. Now, if you're taking a massive lens like the 100-400 or anything else that's longer, you might want to use the actual tripod mount on the adapter. But because you can unscrew it, it fits properly on a tripod when you're just switching lenses, which is something the FTZ adapter does not do, which pisses me off. And the only other thing I need to mention about for build quality is when you click in the adapter into the Z-mount, it does wiggle a little bit inside of the mount when it's all the way through. It doesn't twist off, mind you, you still have to press the release. But I'm worried that if you're using very heavy lenses that you could have the possibility of it not staying on there properly. At least with the largest lenses I tried, it didn't make a difference, but I figured I would mention it. Other than that, I don't have a whole lot else to say. For some of the lenses that did not work, I found something that was a little bit interesting. So for lenses with an actual manual focus to autofocus switch on it, the lenses that didn't work, when I switched them to manual focus, they would sometimes try to start autofocusing. But even when I switched these lenses to manual focus, when it would try to autofocus, it just either wouldn't work or would never give a confirmation. So even if it was in focus, I couldn't actually take a picture if I have it set that way, which I would argue is not good enough. Another good thing to note, though, is that if you do have a lens that does not function, it will still correctly transmit all of the EXIF information minus which lens, and you can still change the aperture. So it's not like lenses are not compatible at all. You can still stop it down. It's just it just effectively becomes a manual focus lens with a CPU in it. So, okay, I guess. I don't really have a whole lot else to say. If you have any other questions for me, let me know. There's currently 5 Canon EF to Nikon Z mount autofocus adapters that I'm aware of. It's these ones. This one here is the cheapest one currently, and it's listed in $158 USD on Amazon. The most expensive one so far appears to be the Steels Ring, which is $300. I really have no comment on the quality of the other ones because I haven't played with them. That's all I've got to say. Bye.